Hello, it's me again, and this time we're going to talk about something a little different, but under the same theme as the previous two videos we put up on our beloved YouTube channel you should totally subscribe to. We have tons of videos on this channel, from interactions and public opinions, music videos, tributes, and analysis videos, which is what this one is. In this video, we're going to talk about the importance of continuity, and we're going to use Captain America in the Marvel Cinematic Universe as the subject in this one. So hang on to your hats because this is going to be a long trip. Let me start off by saying that Cap was my favorite Avenger since Phase 1. I know a lot of people started to like him after the Winter Soldier and then say that they always found him cool just to be sure that they can be seen as visionaries, but I'm not one of them, and I know people say that too. In fact, I prefer the first Avenger over Iron Man 1. It was my favorite Phase 1 movie before I saw The Incredible Hulk in good quality. The thing that made me like the movies wasn't the action, but the way the characters are and how their stories unfold. The thing that I saw that both Steve and Bruce have in common in the two movies is that they don't end up with their love interests in the end. The reasons differ, but the conclusion is still the same. I related more to Bruce because he couldn't be with Betty due to what he is, which is something he can't change no matter what he does, unlike Cap, whose case was more of a sacrifice when it could have all gone well. Both were sad, but I resonated with Bruce's story more. But then this is a Cap video. Let's get a quick run through of what Cap had been up to in the MCU from the start. So in the first Avenger, he fights in World War II, meets Peggy, Howard, and the Red Skull. He was already friends with Bucky. They grew up together, and Bucky gets drafted while Steve is rejected because he's too frail to do pretty much anything. Steve is then recruited by a scientist who sees that there's more to him than meets the eye and administers the super soldier serum to him, which transforms him into the perfect human being, physically. He fights in the front lines and has Peggy fall for him. They dance around their feelings for each other throughout the movie, and in the end, Steve has to crash the Skull's plane in order to ensure the safety of USA, leaving him in a deep cryogenic sleep that he wakes up from 70 years into the future, in our present day. And that's where the movie ends. He loses his friend, his crush, and whatever prospects he had for a good life ahead of him in his world. We see him in The Avengers, where he meets the other superheroes the audience knows, and he leads them in their first encounter with aliens, and the Avengers are assembled. Here we see that he's questioning his relevance and whether his way of doing things is still the way to go about it. Then we have him in Winter Soldier, where we see him more actively questioning the way things work and has an increasingly uneasy relationship with Nick Fury due to the change in the nature of warfare. It isn't straightforward anymore, and the enemy could be anyone, which makes him, as trustworthy as he sees himself, a suspect in everything. During this time, Black Widow tries to set him up with different women so that he can get with the times. He still visits Peggy too, who has Alzheimer's and is the last person from the old days that's alive. All of his other friends are dead, or so it seems. He also makes friends with a guy who runs at the same place as he does, who eventually aids him in his fight against Hydra. The interesting thing here is that he deals with a lot of these new developments and struggles with his place, but always plants his feet and stays firm in his decisions, and everyone else falls in line, ready to follow him. While this is happening, he also takes a chance at romance and asks Sharon out on a date, and gets curved. Out of all the women around him, and the ones Black Widow suggests, he chose her, and she curved him. He also discovers that Bucky is still alive and has been brainwashed into becoming a Hydra assassin. In Age of Ultron, we see him more adjusted than he was before, having decided to track Bucky down and find out just what was the whole deal with him throughout the decades. In this movie, his personal struggles are put in the context of how he fought S.H.I.E.L.D. in his previous appearance. The problem with S.H.I.E.L.D. was trying to stop wars and conflicts from starting, and Ultron was a result of creating a bouncer for the Earth, effectively creating a similar thing as his intention turned into a huge problem for everyone. Cap continued to have problems with Stark's methods, and it got physical when he planned on activating Vision. The movie ends with him saying that he has found his home in the present and that was training new recruits and fighting alongside the Avengers, or leading the Avengers. In Infinity War, he's just kind of there, fighting and kicking butt in cool ways. There's really nothing to him. And in Endgame, we see him angry and a lot out of character. It happens. He failed colossally in the previous movie, and half the universe's population paid the price for it. He goes through the movie acting very differently from the usual. And when he goes back in time, he sees Peggy, and it's shown that he misses her a lot. And he talks about it before traveling back in time, too. When all is said and done, he goes back in time to live out his life with her. He goes back by himself. Let's move on to describing Captain America's personality. Cap is seen as a very nice guy. He's got that standard 20th century good guy thing going on with him. He's extremely loyal, patient, cheerful, and always seems to find a way out of situations. He isn't very good at talking to women. He actually isn't good at talking to them at all. He's also a quick learner, which helps him with communication with other people. He may show hostility towards people, but that is only when they are hostile towards him, like when he first met Iron Man. Iron Man kept belittling him, showing him up, throwing shots at him both directly and indirectly, and Cap was visibly irritated by this behavior. It's a foreshadowing of his annoyance with Nick Fury for keeping secrets and his future conflict with Stark in Civil War. Cap is friendly but stern and doesn't compromise on his beliefs. If he's doing the right thing, he sticks to it. If he thinks he's doing the right thing, he sticks to it. And he will go to the end of the line defending those who are close to him, even if it costs him everything. Now that we got those things out of the way, let's address the theme. What is continuity? Continuity in the context of this video is maintenance of the lore established within the universe. It is, in essence, consistency, where if one thing happens a certain way, then it forms a path for things to have similar results in other happenings. It's how we're able to tell how a character would react to something happening. It's also used to surprise us when they don't behave the way they would, but that usually is for shock value and doesn't become the rule, but the exception. Another important note to have on the character is that this is a comic book character who has been brought to the big screen, and so there's a lot of history to draw from. The movies will never be able to cover every single event in the character's life or be able to replicate the things it does perfectly. But as long as the core characteristic of the character remains, we can call it a faithful adaptation. And Chris Evans was a comic-accurate Captain America, on the most part. This feels a little tacked on, but it is very important to this discussion. Remember how Captain America woke up in the present and that chick walks in trying to make him think that he's still in 1943? Yeah, Joe Johnston, the director of the movie, said that that was Agent 13, also known as Sharon Carter, who was well known as Captain America's main love interest in the source material. Remember how Natasha kept suggesting girls for him to go after in The Winter Soldier? And he kept turning all the offers down, then went and asked Sharon out on a date, which she said no to, and kept turning around to glance at him every time they crossed paths after. Remember how she was the first to react when he gave his heroic speech just before the final fight? He also inquired about her in the end, asking Natasha about her. Remember how in Age of Ultron, when Steve was under the illusion of being in the past and he saw Peggy, he didn't lose control and get all super excited, but was confused as to what the heck was going on? He didn't even dwell on the encounter for more than a scene after, and then went on to say in the end of the movie that he was home in the present. As in, he straight up, explicitly said that he was home in the present day. Remember how in Civil War, Steve and Sharon spend the whole time checking each other out and feeling uneasy around each other, even helping each other out covertly? Well, she was the one helping him out covertly. And then a few scenes after Peggy's funeral, they made out. Did you know that many of the deleted scenes in Civil War showcased more of Steve and Sharon having chemistry? Did you know that Infinity War was going to have a side story of Steve and Sharon looking for an apartment so that they can settle down in together? Did you know that in Endgame they were going to be shown in a relationship that's falling apart? And then, what did we get? After everything, he goes back in time and stays with Peggy, because after everything in Endgame, he just suddenly misses the 40s and Peggy. Steve hooking up with Sharon was a given, and that's what it was set up to be like. Let me explain. In the comics and what we see in the movies, Steve's whole thing is moving on from the past and accepting what is happening in the present, while trying to keep things together. Steve is known as the man out of time, both in the comics and the movies. He tries to keep up with the upbeat personality of a young man in the 40s, but the world has moved past those charms, and he has to learn to keep up. He has a hard time fitting in and even accepting his destiny, but in the comics, the same as in the Age of Ultron movie, he finally accepts this and just starts doing things with his mind focused on the present. It's a valuable life lesson for the audience about accepting that some things don't go the way we want them to, and we may have a far greater destiny in store for us that we just don't know about. Think of all the good Cap did in the present that he wouldn't have been able to do if he lived his life in the 20th century. That's especially true for comics. He's also known as a guy who sticks with his friends through thick and thin and will defend them until the end. You're a top priority if you're Bucky, by the way. This writing was consistent throughout the movies until we end up seeing what he does in the end of Endgame. Cap going back to Peggy is not only out of character, but it's inconsistent with the message that they were trying to portray in the beginning with the character, and goes against what the character is about in the source material. That is not Captain America. All the development he went through, all he did, all the friends he made, and he just abandoned all of that to go back to Peggy. Forget all the growth he went through as a character. What matters is that the internet didn't like the idea of him ending up with Peggy's niece because Peggy was apparently his ex. No, she wasn't. They kissed once and he got frozen less than half an hour later. She met someone new and got married. Watch her documentary in The Winter Soldier and see for yourself when she brings that up. You think it was always meant to be Steve Rogers, but he was hidden. So, what was the point of Marvel's Agent Carter, which at the time of release was canon to the MCU? Season 1 of that show had Peggy say goodbye to her last memory of Steve, and Season 2's last shot was her making out with Daniel Souza, who fit the description of the person she described in The Winter Soldier, one of the many men that Steve rescued during the war. Steve is shown to be a guy who sticks to the rules and only breaks them if they compromise on integrity or on values that he has been taught. Abandoning the present and potentially fornicating the time-space continuum beyond repair is not something a comic-accurate or consistently written cinematic Steve Rogers would do. If one continues to argue that it was always part of the grand design, not now, Kevin Feige picture with Aku's laugh. If one continues to argue that it was always part of the grand design, then they need to ask themselves what the whole point of Sharon Carter as a character is. Why would the directors include Cap's true love interest in the source material, have her develop a relationship with him throughout the movies, and even make out with him, but not have him end up with her, and instead end up with Peggy, the internet's favorite? If you remember correctly, Chris Evans announced his retirement from the role around 2017 when Infinity War was still filming, and this definitely influenced the creative team to conclude his story in a definitive way. He couldn't die in Infinity War, and he couldn't die in Endgame either because Iron Man and Black Widow died in that same movie. It wouldn't have had the same impact. So, we can understand why they made him retire, but making him go back in time to Peggy because he's not over her was just a weird 180 they pulled on his character. And that falls under the category of inconsistent writing. So we have him, in Civil War, outright say that he can't just sit around while things he can change are just going bad. And then 2 appearances later, he chooses to sit through multiple unjust wars, the experimentation and brainwashing of his best friend, the death of his World War II buddy who helped him become a hero, and his wife, Hydra's infiltration of S.H.I.E.L.D., which is Peggy's pet project for the protection of the world, Also, he could go back in time and have some happy fun times with Peggy Carter because all of a sudden, out of the blue, he misses her so much. Yeah, no. The character's entire journey is about moving on and adapting, and that singular creative decision with him made me not like the character anymore. What they should have done with him is either have him too injured to fight physically and remain in the present, or have him retire from active heroics so that he can settle down while working on politics, the other war that needs to be fought. That way, it wouldn't be compulsory for him to appear on screen for the rest of the MCU's existence, and fans would stop begging to see a story about him returning the stones, making him go back on his decision to retire from the role, which is basically what they're hinting at right now. It would be a win on the fan side and the creative side, keeping the story, the character, and the life lesson consistent throughout. Captain America was one of the best characters in the MCU because he was written consistently and served as a living example of how one should move on and accept their present circumstances, but not forget who they are or where they came from. The whole thing with Endgame showed the wrong lesson and said, if you have the chance to go back in time and live the life you feel you deserve to live, do it. Instead of saying, learn to accept what is and make the best out of situations that you have now. I mean, geez, dude, you kind of just abandoned the world in a state of chaos with almost 4 billion people reappearing. And your friend, who's still a wanted criminal, by the way, is left out in the open and now completely alone with a guy that he doesn't really get along with. This is the guy you fought so hard for in Civil War, and now that it's all over, you abandon him just to go back to your crush who you knew for a year, and you've known this guy since you were kids. The Avengers aren't structured either. They're just kind of there now. No leadership, no coordination, no nothing. They're just there. And this is when you were like, yeah, I gotta go. See, that's not very Cap-like. It's not like poetry. It doesn't rhyme. Okay, fine, you can stay, Dave Filoni. Well, that's all we have time for in this video. I hope you're not too mad at me for talking about that decision in a negative light, but I just had to bring it to focus. Please check out our Facebook page, our Instagram page, and you can also go through our channel and check out more of our videos. I'll see you around.